But this is very exciting to me. This is the automobile industry, and this will continue to spur growth like you haven't seen. Before I was elected, we were losing all of our plants. They were being built in Mexico and Canada and other places. Now those plants largely have stopped, and they're moving them to our country.
About 95% of our supplier pool is domestic, or so we thought.
Economic uncertainty surrounding the North American auto industry. The big three are navigating a new era as they deal with the impact of President Trump's tariffs.
Now, General Motors and Stellantis are already feeling the impacts.
The U.S. auto industry has entered uncharted waters, facing economic turbulence that could reshape its future. Back in the days before President Trump took office, American car manufacturing was on the decline. Factories were moving to Mexico, Canada, and other regions, leaving many towns across the U.S. in economic disarray. But as Trump promised, there was a push to reverse that trend, and the auto plants that once seemed to be leaving the country came back. At first, the efforts seemed successful. The push for domestic manufacturing and a tariff-heavy policy aimed at protecting American jobs looked like a win. But it didn't take long for cracks to appear. By April 3, 2025, a shocking 25% tariff hit cars and auto parts, sending ripple effects across the industry. Within months, the U.S. auto scene was transformed. Dealerships stood empty, assembly lines fell silent, and an industry that was once the backbone of American manufacturing began to crumble. What had been sold as protection was beginning to look more like sabotage. The immediate consequences were undeniable. Car prices skyrocketed. Japanese imports, for instance, saw price hikes of $5,000 to $10,000 in a matter of months. As a result, sales plummeted, and families began walking away from new car purchases, unable to afford the inflated prices. Entire showrooms across the country became eerily quiet. It wasn't just a temporary dip. The U.S.'s global auto market share dropped from 18% to under 12% in just 2 years. This wasn't a minor stumble. It was a deep systemic unraveling of the industry. The question everyone was asking, if the heart of American industry, the very sector that once powered the nation's economy, can fall this quickly, what other parts of the industrial landscape are teetering on the edge? Let's dive deeper. The fallout, Nissan's retreat. Nissan was one of the first to feel the sting of these tariffs. After the shockwave hit Detroit, the repercussions spread swiftly south to Smyrna, Tennessee, where Nissan had once been a major economic anchor. What was once a thriving production hub quickly became fragile. Expansion projects were halted, and billions in investment were quietly rerouted to Canada and Mexico. This exodus left the city gasping for economic stability. Within just 3 months, U.S. production dropped by 20%. Nissan cut 13,000 rogue vehicles from its schedules, and 25,000 workers saw their jobs and benefits hanging in the balance. The once bustling town, powered by Nissan's operations, now found itself facing a harsh reality. Not just fewer cars, but a diminished future. The ripple effect was huge. Nissan's move wasn't just about cars. It was about entire communities losing their lifeblood. The Subaru struggle. But Nissan's retreat was just the beginning. Right behind it, Subaru found itself in a similar bind. Known for offering affordable, reliable vehicles, Subaru was suddenly priced out of its own market. The cost increases range from $750 to $2,000 per vehicle, hitting new car buyers the hardest. For many families, the price jump was enough to push them out of the market entirely. Subaru's most popular model, the Forester, was at risk of becoming too expensive for its core customer base, the very families who had helped build the brand's reputation. At the same time, the company's margins were thinning, crushed under the weight of rising parts costs and strained logistics. By the end of the year, Subaru projected a loss of $2.5 billion, a devastating blow to a company that relied heavily on volume sales in the budget-friendly segment. What had started as a tax on imports quickly spiraled into something far more destructive. Entire market segments, once dominated by brands like Subaru, were being stripped away, leaving them unable to hold their ground. The Chevrolet crisis. If Nissan and Subaru's struggles were unsettling, the news from Chevrolet hit even harder. Once the heart and soul of American automaking, Chevrolet's factories went eerily silent in 2025. Iconic models like the Silverado, Tahoe, and Blazer, which had once roared off U.S. assembly lines, suddenly stopped. Plants in Michigan, Texas, and Missouri, the engines of Midwestern industry, fell quiet in a way no one had ever anticipated. The financial toll was immediate. Billions in lost output vanished almost overnight. Tens of thousands of workers were thrown into uncertainty. The ripple effects were felt across the supply chain, with suppliers scrambling to stay afloat. To survive, Chevrolet shifted some of its production lines to Mexico and South Korea, where labor costs were lower. But even as the company looked abroad, it didn't forget its roots. Chevrolet announced a $4 billion plan to bring production of the Blazer and Equinox back to the U.S. by 2027. But many wondered, would this costly return be worth it? Ford's struggle and strategic shift. Meanwhile, Ford faced its own battle. In the spring and summer of 2025, the company posted a staggering $800 million loss in a single quarter. Projections showed losses climbing to $1.5 billion by the end of the year. The tariffs were not only trimming profits, they were dragging Ford's entire financial outlook into dangerous territory. To cope, Ford looked north to Ontario, Canada, which offered cheaper electricity, better incentives, and a more stable supply chain than the U.S. The company announced a $590 million investment to retool its Oakville plant for electric vehicle production. Ford wasn't just shifting models, it was rebalancing its entire strategy to dodge the financial blow dealt by U.S. tariffs. For communities once reliant on Ford's U.S. factories, the shift felt like a betrayal. Stellantis, a collapse too rapid to manage. The economic turmoil didn't stop with Ford. It spread to Stellantis, which faced an even sharper decline. By mid-2025, the company had reported a net loss of $2.3 billion, a shocking reversal from the steady profits of previous years. The new tariffs were eating away at Stellantis' margins, forcing the company into a series of painful decisions. Production projects were put on hold, and plants were slowed down. Workers stood idle, unsure when or if their shifts would resume. In the U.S., 5 facilities shed 900 jobs in the blink of an eye. Across the river in Windsor, Canada, nearly 4,500 workers saw their shifts slashed as schedules shrank. Meanwhile, 2 plants, one in Mexico and one in Canada, were closed down altogether to curb the losses. Stellantis was in full damage control mode, but the impact was clear. Entire communities were feeling the shock waves as factories that had long supported local economies became ghosts of their former selves. Tesla, the new giant, struggling to stay grounded. Even Tesla, once the shining symbol of American innovation, wasn't immune to the tariff storm. Within weeks of the policy changes, Tesla's stock took a dive, shedding nearly 5%. By the second quarter of 2025, the company had faced an additional $300 million in tariff-related costs, further dragging down its once high-flying margins. To adapt, Tesla looked beyond U.S. borders. In Quebec, Canada, the company ramped up production of its 4680 battery cells, sidestepping U.S. tariff penalties. With over 1.2 billion Canadian dollars in incentives, Tesla was able to secure crucial infrastructure and continue production outside the U.S. But this raised an unsettling question. Could Tesla maintain its dominance in the U.S. while moving its critical operations, like battery production, out of the country? The shift also started to erode Tesla's market share internationally, at a time when its domestic operations were already feeling the strain. As the once mighty company navigated the growing pressure from tariffs, its future seemed uncertain. Could the company that had been the flag bearer of the American EV revolution keep its hold on the global market while distancing itself from its roots? General Motors, struggling to stay relevant. Then there was General Motors. Once the giant of the American auto industry, GM found itself trapped under the weight of both history and tariffs. By 2025, each pickup that rolled off its lines carried an invisible surcharge. $3,000 in added costs passed directly onto buyers who were already struggling with rising interest rates and household expenses. For everyday families, this price spike was enough to delay or cancel their purchases. For businesses that depended on commercial fleets, it meant cutting back on orders or holding on to older models longer than planned. By mid-2025, GM had already taken a $1.1 billion hit in the second quarter alone. Analysts projected a total loss of $4 to $5 billion by year's end, much of it directly tied to tariffs. The company's attempts to pivot to electric vehicles, once seen as a forward-thinking strategy, now seem fragile. GM's bet on Ultium batteries and federal incentives began to falter as tariffs on critical minerals and batteries drove up costs. This only added pressure to a company already grappling with legacy costs and aging infrastructure. On top of these financial setbacks, GM's reliance on overseas suppliers for nearly 40% of its parts made its entire vehicle lineup vulnerable to tariff penalties. The predictable supply chains of the past now seem like a distant memory, replaced by rising costs and uncertainty. In Canada, GM's operations in Oshawa and Ingersoll were scaled back, putting thousands of workers on temporary leave. The fear in local communities was that if the crisis deepened, up to 50,000 jobs across the region could be at risk. Even GM's electric vehicle plans seemed cornered by the tariff crisis. The $7,500 incentive that once sweetened the deal for EV buyers disappeared under shifting policies, and new tariffs on vital components sent costs soaring. As production slowed and margins thinned, GM was left to confront an unsettling reality. The company that had once been synonymous with American industrial power was now facing its greatest battle yet. The bigger picture, the collapse of U.S. industry. The struggles of these major automakers are only the surface cracks in a much larger story. The collapse of 7 major brands is a warning sign that the very structure of American industry is beginning to split apart. When the auto industry falters, it has a domino effect on other sectors. Steel mills slow down, battery plants lose orders, logistics networks seize up. What appeared to be a single sector in crisis quickly spirals into a full-blown chain reaction, dragging down everything connected to it. States once heralded as the heart of America's industrial power now face a future of uncertainty. Communities that relied on steady factory jobs suddenly find themselves trapped between mounting debts and mass layoffs. Small businesses that depended on auto supply chains are now facing dwindling orders and empty storefronts. The sense of security that once came from working in these industries is quickly fading, replaced by a desperate scramble for survival. Canada's quiet rise. While the U.S. faces this unraveling, Canada has quietly filled the vacuum left behind. Lower operating costs, stronger incentives, and a more predictable supply chain have positioned Canada as a new manufacturing hub in North America. As American industries falter, Ottawa's steady rise signals a shift in where the region's industrial future might lie. In fact, the conditions that once made the U.S. a magnet for manufacturing have now been supplanted by Canada's more attractive economic environment. With lower labor costs, more reliable infrastructure, and generous government support, Canada is emerging as the new center of manufacturing in North America. The question now is whether the U.S. can reverse course and reclaim its place as the industrial powerhouse of the continent, or if America's decline is irreversible. The final question, what comes next for America? So where does this leave the United States? If the auto sector can unravel this quickly, what happens when other industries, like energy, agriculture, and technology, face similar pressures? Will these cascading economic crises lead to further instability in the U.S. economy? And what of Canada? As it continues to quietly rise as a manufacturing hub, will it force Washington to rethink its entire economic strategy? The answer to these questions will determine the course of North America's industrial future. But one thing is clear, the stakes are high and the time to act may be running out. Thank you for watching. If you found this analysis valuable, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps us continue to uncover the truth that others might not want to share.